you shared that you have an opinion about whether that timestamp 22740 was, whether or not that was the time the search "How long to die in the cold" occurred. Can you tell us, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, your opinion about whether that search, "How long to die in the cold," occurred at 2:27:40 a.m. on January 29th, 2022?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Okay, the objections are overruled.
What I can state to a scientific degree of certainty is that that search occurred at 6:24 a.m. and was the last search in the tab that had been opened at 2:27.
Do you have an opinion, to a degree of scientific certainty, whether there was any other searches similar to "How long to die in the cold" that evening on that tab?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow it.
May I first inquire, you meant morning, I
I'm
assume?
sorry, that morning, yes.
Just clarifying, I did not look at evening searches. And can you repeat? I apologize. I disrupted my own train of
Do you have
thought.
an opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, whether there were any other searches on that tab before the final search at 6:24:47, "How long to die in cold"?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Just ensuring that I have the question correct.
Please.
You're asking if what else occurred in that tab prior?
Yes.
That I cannot say with a clear degree of certainty.
Okay. Did you develop a chalk that I
I
showed
did.
you earlier?
Yes.
Like to approach?
Yes.
Again, I show you. Same document. You recognize it?
Yes.
What is it?
It is the exhibit that I created that was labeled Table 1 in the first report I had delivered.
And does that provide information that will assist us in understanding your opinion?
Yes.
I've moved, subject to redaction, that this be introduced into evidence.
Your Honor, I have no issue with regard to the redaction aspect, but consistent with my prior objections, I would object to that.
Okay, I'm going to allow this into evidence. Your rights are safe, Mr.
Thank you, Your
President.
Honor. Appreciate it.
Exhibit 82.
Madam Clerk, 82?
Exhibit 82.
Thank you. With the court's permission, I'd like to show Exhibit 82 to the jury.
Okay?
Could we enlarge the first two? And we're going to need to get the right column in if we can, please. Thank you. Ms. Hyde, can you see it from there?
I can. Thank you.
If you can walk us through how this exhibit assists us in understanding your explanation and the basis for your opinion.
This exhibit shows the Safari artifacts and artifacts of Google searches in Safari related to the two searches in question, How Long to Die in CILKD and How Long to Die in Cold, that occurred on the morning of November 29th, 2022 on the device under examination.
If I look at this chart and I see in the top left it says 2:27:40 a.m. and then under the search term it says How Long to Die in Cold. How do I understand your opinion that that search didn't happen at 2:27:40?
This document is showing you the data that is the parsed result. The source of that artifact that you see in the last column is a little bit cut off, the browser state db-wall file. That database does store, how the data is stored, the search term How Long to Die in Cold with an associated Mac Absolute Epoch timestamp that translates to 2:27 a.m. That is what is physically stored. That does not annotate the meaning of that artifact. That was determined through testing following the NIST OSAC data generation guidelines for testing.
In the second row, we see a timestamp on the left-hand column, 6:23:49. And it provides artifact, the cache record. What is the term, and what does that mean under the search term?
iOS Safari cache records. A cache refers to something that a computer program wants quick and easy access to. When we search on our phones, anything, a lot of times, be it in Google or in Safari, depending on what type of phone you own, it'll suggest what it thinks you're going to type in, right? So you can click it. It's trying to be helpful. In this instance, at 6:23:49, we have a cache record that indicates that Apple suggested the phrase, "How long does it take to digest food?"
And then under that, 623:51, it appears it says a recent web search, and the spelling is changed. How long, TIDIEINCIKD.
So this, in reference to these two search terms, this is the first actual search that occurs at 6:23:51 a.m. Upon beginning the typing of that phrase, Apple provided the suggested search, and the person inputting into the phone at that time continued to type out a phrase and finished it as "how long, TIDINCIKD," which that is available to us in the Mobile Safari P-list, which tracks recent web searches. And then we'll see 6 seconds later, we get that reference in that Knowledge C database that I mentioned before. That's the next line. So that's the Knowledge C database is Apple's way of keeping knowledge about what the user's doing. It sees and holds your knowledge. It's an easy way to remember it. That's what I teach my students. So that Knowledge CDB tracks a lot of things for predictive purposes. And so 6 seconds later, it's logging that same search. So that search is being tracked in 2 places.
And so one search can be left as artifacts in different locations on the database?
Correct. There can be multiple traces or artifacts of the same user action in different places on a mobile device.
And if we go down to the bottom, the last column, at 6:24:47, we again see "how long to die in cold." And if you look in the first column, it's the same phrase. Is that a coincidence that it appears at the bottom at 6:24:47 and also appears up at 2:27:40?
As mentioned before, through testing of the artifact for Browser State DB, that artifact will hold the most recent search that happened in the tab. So it is logical that HOS long to die in cold was searched at 6:24:18, tracked in that Mobile Safari P list, repeated in Knowledge C, Knowledge made its tracking in Knowledge CDB, and then that table for Browser State DB, which again has the time that the tab was opened, or the last time it was backgrounded, and updated just the website that was visited. So the website, that is why we get that 2:27 time. That's actually, as far as the data storage is, the first thing I have in there, because I want to put it in chronological time order for exhibit purposes, is actually the last thing to happen because it's the update to what's in the tab.
And you offered that the "how long to die in cold" is the last thing to happen. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty the time when that search was made?
Objection, Your Honor.
To a reasonable degree of certainty, I can say that "how long to die in cold" was searched at approximately 6:24 a.m.
Now, moving on from the 2:27 search, there are 2 other issues that you were asked to analyze. And we talked about them at the beginning. Let's begin with whether or not you looked at the data and analyzed the data and came to any opinions about whether that phrase, "how long to die in cold," was user deleted on that device.
So there's 2 really key elements as to if that was user deleted. If the question is, did I come to opinion? Yes.
And can you explain how you came to an opinion that we'll ultimately share with the jury?
The first line in that exhibit, the ending of that, if you remember, it said browser state.db-wall. That's important, so we'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing I want to bring up is kind of how the database works, because I didn't just look at the tool result. I extracted that database and I did a deeper analysis on it using Sanderson's tool because that information was in that dash wall file. So when a SQLite database, which is a specific way of storing, very, very common on mobile phones, actually one of the most common, when that database stores data, it has two versions. The most recent version, and the version in use here, uses what's called a write-ahead log. So before data is committed, it is written to a write-ahead log. I'll kind of explain it. So let's say we're in a restaurant and we're sitting at a table and we're ordering food. Our table is the table. Data is going to come to the table, and that's going to be our food. So when we order food, let's say we've got a chicken sandwich, a burger, and a pizza coming to the table. The chicken sandwich, the burger, and the pizza, the kitchen puts it in the warming area. It's the write-ahead log. The server grabs it from there. It's where data sits before it goes to the table, just like your food goes to that serving station before your server brings it to your table. Server brings it to the table. That table's got its burger, its chicken, and its pizza. Another table orders waffles and pancakes. They think it's breakfast. The waffles and pancakes are made by the kitchen. They're put on the serving area. Waitress comes over. This pizza has pepperoni. I don't eat pepperoni. Can you send it back? Waitress picks up that pepperoni and sends it back. That's a deletion. Pepperoni pizza was just removed from the table, right? We're deleting it. We're moving. We said it's not what we wanted. The waitress is removing it. She brings it back to that serving area. At that moment, that serving area has the deleted pizza, but also the waffles and pancakes that are waiting to go out to the table. That's how a write-ahead log works. Any changes that are happening sit in the write-ahead log until the database is closed, and then when it's reopened, all those changes are made, both additions and deletions. So often when a phone is imaged, when we make a forensic image, the applications are still open, so we have those wall files. When we look in our Safari browser, the database knows to read it to you in its current state. So it tells you where the waffles and pancakes are going. They're going to that table. So it shows it as if it's in the table. But it's not in the table yet. So if when we parse the data and we look at the restaurant and we don't look at the back kitchen, we would only at that time see the chicken and the burger, right? Pizza got sent back, waffles and pancakes haven't come out yet. So when we get the data, we get two files. We get the restaurant, that's the database, and we get the serving area, that's the wall file. Just because it's in the wall file does not mean it's deleted. It means that that record wasn't where it naturally sits yet. It could be that wall file can contain deleteds and food or data that hasn't yet been delivered to the database. So the wall file consists of both. So an assumption that the data was deleted just because it's in the wall file is actually not true. And the peer review paper I mentioned earlier that I had accepted in Forensic Science International actually has a section that explains this exact presence for SQLite databases about how we refer to that as recovered and not deleted. Actually, through that entire document, we don't use the phrase deleted. We refer to things in statement of recovery because we need to determine why it's there. So we can't say that it's deleted just because it came from the wall file. Some tools will automatically indicate to the examiner that they need to dig deeper into that. I did do further analysis by looking at the wall file. That particular item is a little bit more complex, actually exists on multiple pages because it moves as the database is being created, but all of them have the same unique identifier. So it's the same entry. It's not more than one search of Ha's long to die and cold. If there was more than one search that had occurred where it became the top element in that database, we would see that. There are, as I mentioned, other carved from the database, from the wall file elements such as the search for the YouTube video, It's Raining Men, because at some point that was the last viewed item in a tab when that tab was retired right before, also at 2:27 a.m., but a couple of seconds before the How's Long to Die in cold search. So we can see that that table is put to the rear. The newest tab that's open, which is why it's in the wall file, it's the most recent thing because it's like our waffles and pancakes, hasn't been delivered to the table yet. So it can sit in the wall file for that reason. It doesn't indicate it's deleted. The second reason is there is no user interaction in the interface to delete a tab. You can open and close a tab, and open and close tabs are tracked in that database. But you cannot delete a tab. There's no, if you were to pick up your iPhone, I know you don't have them right now, but if you were to pick up your iPhone and look, that wouldn't be a physical option you have in the interface. So it could not be deleted by a user through the interface for that most basic reason.
So a user, could they delete a tab if they wanted to?
There's no actual option to delete a tab. For your web history, you could clear the cache, for example. Most of us are familiar with clearing the cache in your web history. You might do it because you don't want your kids to see what you searched, or maybe your kids don't want you to see what they searched, so they'll delete it. But you can't delete the tab history. It's just what tabs are there. The device is tracking that.
When you looked at the software, whether it was Axiom or Celebrite, when you look just at the report, not the data itself, do either of those reports have any indication noting that that web or that Safari search is characterized as deleted?
Tools, Celebrite denotes it with a red X, which means that it is recovered. Axiom indicates that it is carved. In the same paper that I referenced earlier that I authored, there's a chart in there that shows the distinction between how different tools, some will use red X's, some will use question marks, some will list carved or parse, so every tool chooses to do that differently. That does not mean deleted, it means it needs further analysis.
Should an examiner who looks just at the reports of the software assume that if it is marked as recovered in Celebrite or carved in Axiom, should
an examiner should never assume something's deleted without doing a manual examination.
The manual examination, is that a method that's used, that's generally accepted in the forensic data field?
The NIST Science Foundation paper, as well as the dataset generation guidelines, both speak to conducting testing to verify and validate, and it states clearly that an examiner is to verify and validate findings and to determine meaning.
So given that you've used multiple tools to look at reports regarding this phrase, how long to die in cold, and have seen indications or characterizations of recovered and carved, and in addition to the fact that you actually analyzed the data, did you arrive at an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty whether or not the user deleted, any user deleted the phrase, how long to die in cold?
Yes, if it's how's long to die in cold. Sorry, trying to clarify.
Pardon me. Did you come to an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty whether any user deleted the phrase, how's long to die in cold?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is there was no deletion that occurred by the user because it is not something a user can delete.
Finally, I want to ask you about your analysis of the phone records on this phone attributed to Ms. McCabe. Did you go through an analysis of the phone logs and the phone records on the phone?
I analyzed the call logs and the phone logs on the device that I was given, that I was told belonged to Ms. McCabe, yes.
Would a suggestion or a claim that a user deleted irregularly a number of phone calls, would that be accurate or inaccurate in your experience?
It is inaccurate in this instance.
Can you explain to us why and how you came to that conclusion?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting because of what it appears in the forensics tools and additional artifacts that I looked at that are not parsed by the forensics tools. So the call logs When you look at it, it appears, I don't remember if it's 8:57 or 8:59 a.m. in my mind at the moment, but approximately either 8:57 or 8:59 is the earliest phone call we see on the 29th of January. We see no call logs before, but we do see FaceTime logs before. So if an examiner, again, was making assumptions without testing or reviewing, the first assumption might be, well, things must have been deleted because there's data that exists before, but not current data. So then you have to go, how do phone logs work? And again, create test data and review. What the situation here is that there are 3 types of call logs on this particular phone. There's regular calls, incoming and outgoing. There are FaceTime video chats, incoming and outgoing, and FaceTime audio chats, incoming and outgoing. The storage for that is actually 200 records. So you can only store up to 200 of each. Now, if you were a user of, let's say, WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, those would each count 2, and they'd get their own logs. So when we look at the database for the number of calls, between 8:59 a.m. or 8:57, again, I apologize, I'm not looking at that precise time, on the 29th of January in 2022, there are exactly 200 calls still in that record from then until the imaging of the phone. There are 199 FaceTime video calls and only 27 FaceTime audio calls. So the question is, how do you validate that that's what's happening? So we actually have call logs that we can pick up in other places for recent call logs in the last 7 to 30 days, depending on the exact version of the device and how the biomes are running. We can actually see incoming call logs, the number they go to, and if they're incoming or outgoing in the biomes. So we actually can see the history going back for the entirety of that day on January 29th till midnight. Again, my scope was from midnight until noon. So we can actually see all of the calls. They're just not all in the call history state DB. Now, the call history state DB, from a user perspective, that button on your phone doesn't say call history. It actually says recents. And what it's determining as recents is the most recent 200 of each category. Now, how did I determine this further? There is a running log that exists in a phone. It lasts about 3 days. It's called the unified log. The unified log tracks multiple things that are happening on the phone. In manual analysis of the unified log from this phone, I can clearly see each time a 201st call comes in, the 200th call gets deleted. So it's constantly just the last 200 calls. It may not be typical that we see 200 calls in 3 days, but on this device, we do see 200 regular phone calls in the 3 days between 8:59 a.m. on the 29th and when the phone was imaged.
So do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty whether there was any user deletions from the phone call log that morning?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
The opinion is that I can see that it's done by the device itself utilizing the unified logs, that the system is deleting the 201st call every time a new call is received or outgoing.
Thank you. I have no further questions.